Gaelic football on Off the Ball.
With AIB, proud sponsors of the GAA Senior Football Championship. Check out #TheToughest for more.
Maurice Brosnan of the Irish Examiners with us. Maurice, happy Friday to you. How are you?
Great, Ger, and yourself?
Yeah, good weekend to look forward to. Plenty in both codes to get stuck into. The county of Galway in particular, a crucible weekend for them, you would say, in both hurling and football. Can we start with the footballers? Of all of the ones of the teams who are suffering the most jeopardy this weekend, Galway are the ones who must be looking at themselves going, how do we manage to get ourselves in this situation?
Yeah, I'd say so. I thought we'd cast away that damned term of jeopardy, but apparently it's still around for at least another week. Just fine margins there. The great irony is, if you look at as a sequence of results, if this had happened the other way around in terms of losing to Armagh by a point and then going on to fairly comfortably dismiss of Tyrone and beat Westmeath, you'd be thinking they're hopping. But just the nature of that 1-3 for Shane Walsh, to fine margins without that game, Shane Walsh missing the penalty as well, and suddenly they find themselves in a world of pain. It's, I think about as a county perspective, it's interesting. Last week or 2 weeks ago in Galway, the hurling championship for the local club championship was made. The draw was made, and there was no interest in it. Nobody was really talking about it. Local media didn't really pay any attention to it. But the football championship draw was made this week, and suddenly a lot of people are looking at that and thinking, geez, that could be our future as of Monday. Suddenly we're focused to local matters. So definitely there's a lot more on edge, you would say, but from a football sector, they are where they are. There's a load of caveats you could say about why they're here, and even if they lost, whether or not the season was a success or failure. But ultimately, I think it's as this is another phrase we're going to hear a lot over the next couple of days. It's do or die. Yeah.
Why are they in this scenario? What is it? Was it just an uncareful husbandry of resources?
I don't think so. If you were to sit down at the very start of the year, and which I did, and look back over Paul Joyce's 3 years in charge and tot up who were the 15 most important players, who were the players who played the most minutes under him. This was a 3-year project. He agreed a new deal to stay on for another 3 years at the start of the year. But if you were to do that based off his first initial 3-year term, what's striking is that how many of them suddenly were lost. True, I don't think there's any fault of anybody, just bad luck, I would say. Fionn O'Lee was in that 15, who was a sub, came on the Ireland final. He went to Australia. Kieran Malloy and Liam Selk were both in that 15. They were both injured. Sean Mulcairn, obviously the fullback who shattered his kneecap last year, hasn't seen a minute of action since. Then you throw in on top of that, it was the Roscommon League game in Sawtell when Damien Comer, 6 minutes in, soars for a ball in the square, lands very awkwardly on his knee. The initial fear is his year over. The way he went down, the way he limped off, we're starting to fear about that. And then you throw in on top of that, the very first league game, Robert Finley, there was no malicious in it. It was just a late block as somebody who's kicking a point, his ankle gets a knock. That was the same ankle he injured against Mayo last year. So that just compounds everything that's happening. And given the nature of this championship, and this is why this game is such a killer for them, Ger, as well, they really didn't get a nice window to resolve all that kind of stuff. Shane Walsh comes back late. He's immediately fired in to make up for other absences. They're playing week on week, and there's never a window to solve all this kind of stuff. So, I'd say the lads are doing all kinds of cryotherapy. They were down in Blackrock in the sea last night doing all the kind of stuff that you would try and do for recovery. But without that, what would have been such a crucial 2-week block here, they're under the cosh.
How under the cosh do you think they are? So Comer's named, Sean Kelly's named. We heard rumour of crutches last week for Sean Kelly. He's at the level where if they were to continue on and if they win this game and reach a semi-final and maybe a final, he's in the conversation for Footballer of the Year. So they really need him, but if he's not fit, he's not fit.
Yeah, not just rumours. I mean, it could have been prevented, but I definitely saw him. He came out. We were waiting for McGeaney and Carrick-on-Shannon last Sunday. He came out against me on crutches, and his ankle was in a moon boot as well. So that was a situation. That could have been post-game, whatever you want to call it. But no matter what way you look at it, from that to a week turnaround is going to be incredibly difficult. And he is such, as you mentioned, he is such a crucial player, particularly given if he comes out, as I mentioned, Selk and Malloy are already missing. So if he comes out, you have such an inexperienced full back line. Realistically, it probably ends up being Keane Hernan, who came back from a career-threatening injury last year. Really, he came in for a mid-championship debut, did really well on John Heston against Westmeath. Probably had a more difficult day on Andrew Murnan last week. He'll be in full-back. In the other corner, you have Johnny McGrath, who only came into the team last year, and Jack Lynn, who's the young footballer of the year. So that is just a really inexperienced full-back line. And when you consider there's every chance that those three will line out in Sawtell on Sunday, and they'll be facing down against Aidan O'Shea, one of Tommy Conroy or Killian O'Connor, and Ryan O'Donoghue. a fairly formidable matchup, I have to say.
Yeah, on the other side, right, have we seen Aidan O'Shea up against Sean Kelly in a full game before, like, as opposed to going in and out? I don't think.
So 2021 they played in Croke Park in the last of the COVID year, and Sean Kelly was rampaging forward for the first half. He caused wreck, and I don't know if you remember at half time, him and Rob Finley, they both got injured and both came off, and the first three balls, literally the start of that second half, they all lumped 3 balls in on top of Aidan O'Shea and he destroys them. They just didn't have a matchup to live with him. But now I would say if Cian Hernan ends up going in there, Cian Hernan will do the same thing as Sean Kelly tries to do. He'll try and run him. He won't go wrestling him because I think they know better than to let that happen. But as matchups go, it would be brilliant. It's a huge challenge for Aidan O'Shea. I mean, suddenly off the back of that free last weekend, I know you can't keep pointing at raw numbers, particularly with a guy like his game, but the fact is he's only scored once from playing this championship is going to start to become an issue. So there's a bit of pressure on him to step up this weekend. As a matchup, it would be amazing. At the league finals, probably we saw another ish version of it, but again, that game was what would you call it, cagey. So maybe we didn't see it, the one-on-one duel that you want. But now maybe who's to say we'd get it this weekend anyway? Yeah,
I don't think we're going to get it this weekend. Do you? Do you? How confident are you that we're going to get 60 or 70 minutes from Sean Kelly?
Not very at all. Not very. I don't. This is a very obvious thing to say in one respect, but both sides have named their teams, their so-called 26s as of today. I would be shocked if those two teams start. If they've pushed me for a number, I think there could be 4 changes combined here now before those games start. We don't know what the situation is with Galway. Last weekend, Dylan McHugh and Damien Comer were named. They both didn't start. There was a situation with getting a medical note in time. They ended up having a panel of 24. I asked Mark Joyce about it afterwards. He said it wasn't an issue, but other teams have been able to make the standby players available. So you could imagine whatever happens this weekend, they'll have that boxed off and ready to go if they need it. But yeah, I wouldn't. I think on both sides there could be changes here.
Will you just explain that for people who probably are unaware? You've got to tell Croke Park, the powers that be, who your matchday squad is, and then you're not allowed to make changes unless medical emergency. Is that it?
Yeah, so this was at the start of the year. There was a couple of things that the GA wanted to make clear. One thing, I don't know if you remember, there was a thing about the disciplinary process. Like, they wanted to outline the system actually does work. Like, a lot of people, including me, have said the disciplinary process in the GA is broken. But when you actually look at the raw numbers, the amount of successful appeals, it kind of bears out that there's a system there and it does its job. At the same time, they wanted to spell out about this 26, a situation that a couple of managers have. John Kiley, I don't know if you remember, the Limerick Hurling manager, took particular issue with it. But effectively, you have to submit a 26 on a Thursday night to Croke Park. You would put in your 26 and line it out whatever way you deem fit. But a lot of teams would go 1 to 15 and then their subs. And they'll release that to the media on Friday morning. That's why you see a lot of teams this will help us promote the game, help us talk about the game. Journalists like me have been crying out for this stuff for donkey's years. So they'll get these 26, and the only way you can make a change to that 26 is if you have a bereavement, a medical note, or this was a couple of months ago now, so a COVID cert as well. That was those 3. You can make a change to 26. It sounds like there's a bit of a deadline in and around throwing how close you can get in the paperwork to do that. But as long as you submitted those players a 4 standby list and you've submitted one of those reasons, you can get. So we've seen a couple of teams have done that this year. Mayo actually have done it, have brought in somebody from the standby list. But for whatever reason, Galway weren't able to do that last weekend.
Would that suggest they didn't have a standby list of 4 players? Because obviously they all have team doctors. You can just write a cert.
Exactly. Or my guess is that there was a paperwork issue. I'm not fully sure is the honest answer. But they had, just to clarify, Desi Keneally and Ger Gilroy, who weren't in the 26, did the warm-up, stood in for the national anthem. But my understanding is they weren't eligible to come on. They didn't have they had to what they had in the day as a matchday panel 24.
Okay. Is that like you have to plan for every eventuality?
Exactly. Yeah.
And look, better to have it happen last week than this week, and maybe that's what they need to learn. In terms of the changes that you think might be made, the Galway ones are relatively. We can certainly speculate about them, and they're obvious. In terms of Mayo and the changes that they might make, what do you think?
So there's 2 things here. There's what you would foresee is the predicted change. James O'Connor was a name to start. That was kind of an obvious one. I'm not sure will James Carr start. He's got a great record against Galway. I don't think I need to remind anybody of the goal he scored against them in 2019 in the Gaelic grounds. But I don't know if his form justifies his inclusion from the start, particularly when you consider Tom McConnery came on and scored 1-1 and Killian O'Connor tore it up for his club last weekend and is finally back in the 26. So we might see at least one change there. The other one is, you could argue it's the biggest whatever you want to call it, conundrum of Ken McStay's managerial reign is, what is he going to do about his spine, or particularly about six? Like the prevailing theme now is stuff we've talked about. I spoke about it on this show previously, is they don't necessarily know their best midfield combination. They definitely don't seem to have a sure plan about centre back. His big idea, the thing McStay wedded himself to when he went into Mayo, was Conor Loftus as their centre back. And then you look at not even just the concession of the penalty, but just I thought actually there was a kick out before that where Micheál Martin was, it very obviously did not want to kick the ball long, big press on, eventually goes long, the ball is flicked over, and they're just wide open down that centre channel, and that I think has to be a concern. So this is something, they've done a lot of experimentation, but the only real adjustment they've done at centre back is Jason Doherty played the dead rubber league game against Monaghan, which ironically actually conceded the black card, that when we finally, everybody was reminded of this new penalty rule about the 21-metre drag backs. But that was the only other adjustment we've seen at centre back. So do they stick with it? Do they persevere with this idea that this was their idea when they came in at the very start? It's work. To their mind, maybe it is working. Anytime Kevin McStay is asked about it, he's very defensive of the player and doesn't feel that the criticism is justified, and makes the case of what they're actually looking at is what he does with the ball. And he's such a good baller, and his kick passing ability is, that's proven, but it's out of possession that the conundrum is. So I don't know. The honest answer, I don't know. I wonder, could you see something like Paddy Durkin win 6, or is there a flyer that Jason Doherty goes in there, or do they just stick with what they've been doing for the year and hope it pays off?
And can you not just offer him auxiliary support by dropping back one of your half forwards?
See, I wonder, was that the idea last week, that rather than all this focus on him, it's a systematic thing, and that's why they started Cohn and Ruan and Jim O'Connor. These three, of those three, two are kind of defensive midfielders, and they theoretically will drop back and be able to cover for that channel. And Jim O'Connor is brilliant at that; he covers back so well. But it didn't work. Like that if that was your plan, it didn't work against Cork, and that has to be a concern. That whatever. But I would say, when you consider how Cian O'Neill is, how well he knows this Mayo team, how Galway were set up for the first day in Castlebar last year, we know exactly how Galway are going to play. Like, there's absolutely no doubt about it that they're going to mirror what they did last year. This probably won't be particularly given the weather conditions, it won't be the most open game. I still think it'll be an entertaining game, but I don't know if it'll be the most open game. But all that considered, if you're drawing a target around Mayo, that's one thing they're going to drill down on. So they're going to have they can't stick with what they've been doing for this season. They're going to have to change something. So whether that's personnel or whether it's system, we'll find out Sunday.
It's such a good game.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And even just from a local perspective, like, I do think it kind of reminds me. I interviewed Billy Joyce, who is Park's uncle. One thing I've noticed about Park Joyce, actually, he's very conscious of history. Like, before the All Ireland final last year, there was a media event in Pearse Stadium, and he was at his most expressive when he was asked about Sean Purcell. That was when he was really kind of open and remembered the days when he'd come into the dressing room and this Galway legend, and the little kind of quirks and mottos that he would say to the lads at the time. And so Galway were pretty much convinced they were going to get a league final before the final round. And Park Joyce brought up unprompted the fact that they hadn't won a league title since his uncle Billy won one in the 80s. That was the last league final that they got to win. That streak still, obviously because they lost to Mayo, that streak still continues. But I interviewed Billy anyway before that league final, and I remember asking him about the Mayo rivalry, and he said during his career, like, he played 16 years for Galway, and beating Mayo was like going to mass. Like, they lost once ever. They got their club with their club Killearn. They got to 2 Connacht finals, Beck-Arrymore and 1 Castlebar in the other. Like, they had just an unbelievable dominance over Mayo. And then suddenly that flipped. Like, under James Horn, effectively, they did this a 6 in a row, to the extent where in 2016, when Galway finally ended that streak, before they've won any silverware, their fans are invading the pitch in Castlebar singing "Low Lie the Fields of Athenry." So there was this huge shift then. And then last year, when you consider how big that result was for Park Joyce in that context, and that's why I'd say the 2020 and 2021 losses to Mayo really stung. Like, it was their end of their championship year. 2020 was the Owen McLaughlin tackle, if anybody remembers that, when he slide tackle at the end. I'd say that really, really stung. No inter-county manager likes losing, but Park Joyce definitely doesn't like losing, and definitely doesn't like losing to Mayo. So you add all that context in, the fact that what effectively kick-started the successful period of his managerial career was the Mayo game last year. And now you've got a game where, as of Monday, one of these two teams are out. Like, it couldn't be set up better. And
in your head, is there a pattern of play that leads you to think one of them is better set up to play the other, and so therefore in your head they're favourites?
I think Galway's issues by and large this year have been personnel, in terms of missing personnel, injuries, and the final 5% that they were, when Tyrone were down to 13 players, they didn't put the foot down. probably their conversion was pretty poor against Armagh, didn't take enough of their chances. Whereas my sense from Mayo is that their issue is still a system, of play that they come up against, and they still don't have a definitive answer. We saw that against Louth, we definitely saw that against Cork, and that's a deeper issue than what's facing Galway right now. Now, there's still every chance that Mayo will beat Galway. Their recent record is pretty good in this, and there's a lot of players there who have enjoyed a lot of experience. And the one advantage from a Mayo perspective, Ger, as well, is that if you consider this Galway team, not since 2017 have they lost a championship game and still been in the competition to go on and win a championship game. So, you just look back on their records. 2018 lost to Monaghan, lost to Dublin. 2019 they were beaten by Roscommon in Connacht, went into the Gaelic rounds and lost to Mayo. 2020, and a whole new group. Like, that team was effectively dismantled, and they brought in a new bunch of Joyce's 20s. 2020 they lost the Connacht final, they're out for the year. 2021 lose the Connacht final, they're out for the year. Last year, 2022, losing All-Ireland final, they're out for the year. So they have never had to lose, deal with that disappointment, and then lift it again in a week's time. Whereas Mayo, and I mean this with the greatest respect in the world, Mayo have trademarked that. That is their incredible ability, is that they lose to Galway in the opening championship game last year and spin it within a week to go on and beat Monaghan and Kildare. They have such a good ability. They know this road really well, and I wouldn't overestimate how big an advantage that is.
Okay, so you're making Mayo slight favourites.
I think if Sean Kelly doesn't play, I think Mayo are definitely favourites. But if he does, you can say the simplistic analysis, but I do think he is so integral to what Galway do. He's a crucial player. So if he plays, you'd give Galway the edge, but if not, you'd give to Mayo.
We are talking with Anthony Nash today about the hurling, so we're not going to spend too much time talking about the Galway hurlers, but it is like one of those seismic weekends for the entire county where they could both catapult themselves into All-Ireland contenders if they win this weekend in a specific manner. If they come through unscathed in terms of injuries, like if the footballers overcome Mayo, they're going to fear nobody, assuming Sean Kelly's fitness for the rest of the season and Shane Walsh is in form. With the hurlers, if they can just get a little bit confident, stupid, then the difference between them and Kilkenny was a hair's breadth. The difference between Kilkenny and Limerick last year wasn't that much, and Limerick have definitely come back to the pack. So, like, a big out weekend for the good folk of Galway. Yeah,
and the really easy thing to do is draw a parallel and how it's a defining game for both. But I think the pressure on the hurlers is very different. I think the hurlers, there's way more onus on them to get a result for a couple of reasons. If you look at where Galway hurling is right now, I don't know if it's fully appreciated. Just you speak broadly, they had incredibly successful minor teams 4 and 5 years ago. Of that, only one of them is on the senior panel. Donald O'Shea, Eamon O'Shea's son, is the only one who's kicked on from that. They haven't introduced as many young players as you would like to see into their senior group. A lot of their stalwarts are the same guys who won in Ireland and are now in their 30s. So their big idea, talking about big ideas, their big idea is to swap Ger McInerney and the high bark from 3 to 6 to 6 to 3. That's their change. Joseph Cooney is still a stalwart to this team. Conor Cooney probably isn't in form. He hasn't been able to start now this weekend. Probably unsurprising to a lot of people. But that youthful burst injection hasn't come. And you add in on that the fact that as a club championship, St Thomas's have been unbelievably dominant in Galway. They're an incredible club, a small village club, but they were wiped effectively in the semi-final last year and had no success when they left the Galway championship before that as well. And you start to worry what would happen to Galway hurling if they don't have a big season soon. That's why I think the losing that Leinster final, and you're totally right, as close as it was, there was a real need for silverware. It's one Leinster title in 5 years now, and the question is why. And when you consider all that, I think there really needs a spark from somewhere. That's why I do think this game is crucial from a Galway hurling perspective. Just flip it, draw the obvious comparison. The footballers, Paul Joyce, I think, has brought up 13 of his from those two under-20 teams into that senior team. So all of them, that's a huge progression. Long term, we wouldn't have any fear about that. Whereas just from a hurling perspective, the way their under-20s were so meek in Leinster this year, all that stuff would definitely spell that there's a big pressure on. I'm not talking about this specific group, but just Galway hurling collectively definitely needs a big result.
Yeah, Scale was talking about how Paul Bellew was talking to him about the fact that it's basically been one score that they've been knocked out in most of the last 7 or 8 seasons, and so they're so close to being at the very top table, and yet if they lose this weekend, they're going to feel very far away.
They will, and that's, you probably have to, and like that point to what Scale made there is so valid, and you kind of have to disattach from the usual stuff that's thrown at the hurlers about psychological weakness or a soft underbelly or all that kind of carry on. I do think that's not necessarily the issue. Galway have a brilliant record, by the way, of losing in particularly in SL finals in a bunch of different fashions and bouncing back really well in quarterfinals. They did it in Micheál Donoghue's first year. They were beaten by Kilkenny, bounced back against Clare. They did it last year, obviously. I mean, that they were castigated after that Kilkenny result. That's probably the no-show that came with it in the Leinster final last year, and bounced back to beat Cork. So you wouldn't absolutely underwrite the fact that they have that in their locker. And speaking of the point we made earlier, the players know that road. They know exactly what it takes to lift it again. But there definitely is this, even just the scale of which I personally think that Galway team will start. But when you consider the fact that if I told you at the start of the year, Ronan Glennon, who was such a leading light last year, he is no longer formed. He's not going to start. Conor Cooney's not going to start. Fintan Burke is not going to start. You'd be surprised. So there is an element of not really sure where they're at, and a positive result would give so much validation to a lot of what's going on.
Okay, back to the football, because we've done enough hurling. Gaelic football and Off the Ball is in partnership with AIB, proud sponsors of the GAA Senior Football Championship. Check out the hashtag the toughest for more. Kevin Feely, your piece with him was, in my mind, one of the defining pieces of the GAA year that was committed to print. It was brilliant, and it was totally honest about the difficulties in coming back, but also I think the thing that maybe we don't always appreciate about these players, and I was thinking about it from the Cork perspective as well, is that they've laboured for so long in effectively what the county would consider a wilderness, but the level of commitment and dedication they had probably even surpasses the dedication and commitment that the players in the best teams have, because the best teams are so festooned with great talents. And there's a few of the Cork footballers that sprung to mind when I was thinking about that last week and the connection with Feely. But for Feely to have that moment and for the whole country to see it, like, no greater man deserved it than him.
Yeah, exactly. You couldn't have said that better, and I appreciate that as well. But just from a broad perspective, the point you made there is so valid. If you think about Joe O'Connor from a Kerry perspective, Joe O'Connor was Kerry captain last year, does his ACL, played in Ireland final and does the ACL. But the obvious attraction for Joe O'Connor is to get back to an All-Ireland winning team. He's played in Ireland final, he's tasted that. There's such an easy caveat there. And the thing that I was kind of curious and I wanted to delve down to when I met Kevin was, how do you motivate yourself to go through this incredible rehab program? Like, push yourself to the nth degree. To what end? What are you trying to get back towards? And he was, I just remember I met him in Tala, where he's a physical trainer there and he has a gym, and he was so adamant that Kildare can be a superpower. I think he said, like, that they can rise again, and he wants to be part of that. I think he actually said he wants to drive that. And when you consider that context and how he pushed his body to get back, and this is in the context of he had a really bad knee injury the year previous as well, against Dublin again, which was a contact injury, just a really unlucky. And then, as you said, did his Achilles playing a club championship game. Had absolutely no idea what happened. He turned to confront the man behind him, thinking he'd been kicked, and then realised immediately, oh, this is a lot more serious than that. And within 6 months' time, he's back in Dublin. And when you consider, so that was the context to which we did our piece, or which I spoke to him. And then in the months or the weeks previous, you could argue it turns worse in terms of you'd know better than I would, but definitely seemed to be the mood really soured around Kildare. I remember just the small wins, how much they seemed to savour the small wins, hoping for a spark from somewhere. I did the Cusack Park game when they played Clare, and they really took a huge moment in front of what was a fairly modest away supporters that day to embrace that. But Feely was, again, that day was awesome. In and out of the team, plays this big new idea was he was going full forward against Sligo, and actually caught a mark early that day. And I was like, okay, this could be interesting. And then you see what happens last weekend. And there's nobody who probably deserves it more. But just from the perspective of what I would say, as much as he is driving himself individually to get back there, he's doing it for the collective. And if you can't admire that, then you're probably in the wrong game. It
was Ian Maguire who I was thinking of from Cork, particularly at the weekend as well. Like, the chance that Cork and Kildare have now to turn this into an incredible season for them by getting back to Croke Park and then putting it up to somebody in a quarter final, that's the prize on offer for them. And I think that's the excitement of this wildcard weekend, that again, maybe the games are one-sided at the weekend, and maybe we've misunderstood, or something happens and there's a softness or something that happens in the games and they're less exciting than we think they could be. But for the preview, for us to be able to legitimately talk about these counties in a way that we've seen enough of them, we've seen the pattern begin to emerge, we've got enough to talk about to credibly say that they can hold their own against the best teams in the I think this is all working out. No?
From a system perspective, you mean?
Well, I still think there's massive flaws, obviously, but I think last weekend retrospectively justifies the first 2 rounds of matches.
Yeah, I would agree to a certain extent. I do think the great thing about the nature of this system as well is that we keep saying there's no great teams in this championship. I heard you talking about the situation where individuals could win All Ireland basically this year if you had a great performance. But in that context, the value of momentum, like the value of them, I don't think you'd underestimate what it means for Kildare and Cork to be bouncing into this weekend games. When you consider the context of a Galway, for example, like a Galway, and the psychological damage that was done last week, trying to come back from that setback, and suddenly you're scrambling trying to get fit and stuff. Whereas I just, from a move perspective, there's nothing tangible we can point to. There's no metric here that you would say this is the reason that they're going to be okay. But from a Cork and Kildare perspective, I would, and maybe people disagree with me on this, I think from a Cork and Kildare perspective, a performance is way more important this weekend than a result. Even if they were to lose but bow out with their head as I go and toe-to-toe team like a Westmeath did against Tyrone, I think that would have you in a lot greater stead than if they were to scrape out a result and then go out meekly in a qualifying or something like that. I do think from a long-term perspective, I know that's not what these players care about, but it would definitely stand for them to, again, come out with a big performance this weekend, show that we're able to be a consistent, competitive team for the durations. Because that was the label that was shown to them for a long time, that both of those counties specifically were flaky. So if they could put together consistent performances, I think that would do wonders.
I tend to agree with you. The one thing I would say is that I feel now if they were to put in big performances, those big performances could easily result in victories. Like that's the bit where it turns out we were undervaluing many of the things that the teams were doing. That, like, if you take half of the game that they had against the two halves in the league and the Leinster Championship against the Dubs, the game in Nolan Park, disaster set up, seems to have been. It seems like they collectively forgot what had worked for them in Leinster. That half that you talk about in Clare, when Kildare, that essentially kept Kildare out of the Tailteann Cup and gave them the opportunity to have last weekend's victory. And I don't know if they were to be able to follow that up, I can see how that would be a catapult forward for them. And I think the same if Cork were to win this weekend, then they're going to feel good about life for the next couple of years.
They will, and Cork have the added bonus of that they know there's a huge injection of young players coming. There seems to be a new coach in his first year. You could definitely point to that you get a huge lift out of that. On top of that then as well, that they're getting their stalwarts on the pitch, which I think is so important. Like Brian Hurley, I know he came off injured last weekend, and you'd hope that he'll turn around for this weekend, but Brian Hurley back on the pitch playing well is so important. Ian Maguire and Conor McCallaghan in midfield, they are. And the big thing from a Cork perspective, and actually from a Kildare perspective too, funnily enough, they're a ferociously athletic team. There's this idea that there would be any gulf between them and the top teams has been totally diminished, because you just look at Conor McCallaghan and Ian Maguire, and then right in front of them you've got Roy Dean and Killian O'Hanlon. Like these are thoroughbreds. You have absolutely no fear about them competing with anybody else. So from an athletic perspective, I still do think like Cork are trying to get the balance right. Cork remind me of when Kevin Walsh first went into Galway. Like there still should be, despite how good that result was last week, I still think there should be room to get Stephen Sherlock and Brian Hurley into the same team. I still think that Conor Turbish should be on the field. This guy was such a talented underage player. So there's a way to go yet, but I couldn't agree with you more. Like from right now, all signs are positive.
One last thing, and I know we've got to wrap this up, but the other thing that's happening is that everybody's getting the same amount of exposure, and so therefore it feels like we might have one of the most competitive years ever for All-Stars, and maybe one of the best years ever for All-Stars, and that they will be totally fair. It won't just be, oh, you reached the All-Ireland final, and so therefore you're going to have 8 or 9 players because you're the best team in the country. We'll be like, well, hang on a second, we actually got loads of exposure to players who played high octane games, as many high octane games as everybody else, and so therefore, like at this stage you would say Enda Smith is a shoe-in, for example, and I'm not sure that would have been the case if he just had the Connacht Championship and then they'd been knocked out in an All-Ireland quarter-final or semi-final.
Yeah, I'll text you in a month and remind you of this when it was an All-Ireland semi-final and a final that has decided a lot of these phases. I have no ties to a selection committee. I'm not on a selection committee, but I definitely do think that it is an issue with the All-Star selection, is that it is affected by recency bias. Not that semi-final and final performances shouldn't have more weighting, but just for example, right, if you consider Brian Stack, the Roscommon defender, has started off his championship by Mark Ryan O'Donoghue, who kept him scoreless. He then went on to Shane Walsh. He then went on to the Dublin game, Conor O'Callaghan. in total, of those 3 players, he conceded 2 points. Then goes into Sligo, takes Niall Murphy, who again is an incredibly brilliant forward. I think he kept him to a point. Like, this guy has been a sensational man-marking defender. But if Roscommon go out this weekend, I think all that is forgotten. I don't think people are going to remember how good Brian Stack was for those games. Unfortunately, even though you could argue he's got 4. Somebody needs to have more than 4 brilliant defensive performances to knock him off. But I'm not sure if it will happen. The other thing, just on the point you made there in terms of the benefit of this system, because teams this is the same thing that happened in the league, because they're getting constant exposure to top quality teams, tactically you're forced to innovate again and again and again. So that's good for Gaelic football. Like, gradually, because you will learn so much by playing top level teams. A team like Cork, for example, what they got out of that round robin series, what that'll do for their system and make them a better team, and then that'll happen across the board. So you would hope that this would rise all boats.
But Maurice, the game is dead. Did you knock it down?
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not standing here with my head in my sand and saying the last couple of months was brilliant either. But I can remember vividly a month ago, sitting at home at the end of the league, watching the Sunday game, and Jackie Terrell and Donal Logue were on the screen talking about why they wanted to ban consecutive hand passes, that every restart needed to go up beyond 45, to how badly hurling was. This was based off what they saw in the league. And I thought the league for hurling was terrible too. But we're 6 months later and now we're hailing we all claim to be the greatest sport in the world. So I just would say that there's no harm in judging the whole sample size, that maybe that conversation could happen after the season when we're all more rational about it.
Yeah, that's not part of our accelerated culture though, Maurice. Thanks a million. Enjoy the weekend. Cheers.
You too, Ger.
It's Maurice Brosnan of the Irish Examiner there, and a reminder, Gaelic Football and Off the Ball is in partnership with AIB, proud sponsors of the GAA Senior Football Championships. Check out the hashtag #TheToughest for more. We also did quick picks. If you missed those, they're in the OTB GAA podcast feed, wherever you get your podcasts, and of course the best place is the OTB Sports app.
Gaelic football on Off the Ball.
With AIB, proud sponsors of the GAA Senior Football Championship. Check out #TheToughest for more.